What's going on, guys? Today we are going to be talking about five monsters for, you know it, you love it, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. But we're not just going to be talking about any monsters. If you read the title for today's video, we're going to be talking about oozes, the squelching, slimy, wimey boys themselves. Now, most people know, the gelatinous cube, maybe a black pudding, things like that. But funny enough, there actually aren't too many oozes in D&D 5e, but I bet there were definitely more than you may have known about, and we're going to be talking about five really interesting but underrated ones that maybe you could use in your game. Personally, I really like oozes. I think they're super fun and they're not used as much as they could be. So yeah, let's jump right into it and let's talk about our first slimy wimey oozy woozy boy. Alrighty, so the first ooze we are going to be talking about actually came out in a pretty recent book. Many of you may have heard of it, known as Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Now, personally, I actually haven't seen this ooze used in a game yet, and I haven't had the chance to use it yet, but it's something that I would love to incorporate. I love dragons, I love oozes, and put them together. I mean, come on, that's pretty hard to beat. But we have our Dragon Blood Ooze, which is a CR 5 creature, so it's right in that, like, nice, spot of D&D where like you're just starting to get powerful, but you can still definitely, your players are still they're pretty easy to do a little murder on. Um and I think this ooze is very cool. So for its stats, its highest stat is actually going to be its strength, followed up by its constitution, and it is not a sentient ooze, as its intelligence is only 2. But it does somehow, with an intelligence of 2, have a 10 charisma and a 12 wisdom. How does that even work? How can you have a 2 and anyway, that's a discussion for another day of why that makes no sense to me, but whatever. So if it's for its skills, it's got perception and stealth, and it has a whole bunch of damage resistances, as slimes are known to do. Slimes can be a little bit harder to use because they tend to have a lot of resistances and immunities, which can be frustrating for players. So I would use them sparingly, but if you use them right, they can be a super fun challenge. So it's a resistant to acid, cold, fire, lightning, and poison damage, and then its condition immunities are blinded, charmed, deafened, exhausted, frightened, grappled, prone, and restrained. And then I would argue it is a large size creature, so you can't like put it in a jar, but like I don't know, maybe if someone has like creation or something and they make like maybe like a large ass jar, then I'd allow it to be restrained because that's really funny. I think and that's really creative, so like I don't know. Like I would, always let your players be creative, you know what I mean? And for senses, it's got a blind sight out to a radius of 120 feet, blind beyond that radius, and its passive perception is 14. So for languages, it understands Draconic and languages of its creator, but it can't speak any other languages. So it's amorphous, which is great. Most oozes have the amorphous trait or some version of it. It also has spider climb. And for its actions, it has a multi-attack and a pseudopod attack, as well as a slime breath, which this one is definitely specific to the dragon blood ooze because, slime breath. Ugh. The ooze expels a spray of gelatinous mass in a 30-foot cone. Each creature in the area must make a DC 14 Dex save or wow. Sorry. On a failed save, the creature takes 22 acid damage and is pulled up to 30 feet straight toward the ooze. On a successful save, the creature takes half as much damage and isn't pulled. And that's pretty cool. So we do have a little description here. Not all slimes have this, but some of the newer ones I definitely think tend to have a little bit more of a descriptions. So magic-minded artisans have long incorporated parts of dragons' bodies into magic items, crafting dragon hide, armor, and forging weapons from claws and teeth. Alchemists have found beneficial uses for dragon blood, but ill-advised experiments have also given rise to dragon blood oozes. The congealed blood of a dragon given mobility and hunger, the ooze tries to shape itself into a draconic form. It cannot hold a coherent shape for long and soon collapses into an amorphous heap. Similarly, it tries to manifest a breath weapon but manages only to spew forth part of its own body and then reels it back in. I think this is really cool. There's a lot of flavor intense things that you can do with this. You could even flavor this as like maybe it's like living dragon shit. Like maybe the party's chasing down like a dragon that's just so magical and it's like shits, and then it's like it turns into a dragon, or maybe like a dragon shit ooze and stuff, like a dragon blood ooze. I don't know. I think there's a lot of cool thematic things here that work really well together. Or what if you wanted to play maybe you want to play uh like a dragonborn, but you want something different, so you play a dragon blood ooze dragonborn, or maybe a plasmoid dragon blood. Like that could be like a dragon blood plasmoid. That sounds cool as crap. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of it for our first one. There's a lot of cool story elements here, especially, the mad scientists. You can flavor a lot of oozes like that, but I think this one works specifically well because you can go into the nature of like, the fact that it's trying to like take this draconic shape, and it's failing and it's reeling back, or yeah, this is great. It's a great ooze. All right, let's let's move on to the next one. So for our next one, we have something a little bit interesting here because I'm sure a lot of people who've played D&D and before, Dungeons and Dragons, whatever you want to call it, you've heard of the black pudding, right? It's infamous. It's a very frustrating creature, and it can be, it's really hard to kill just because it has so many immunities and resistances. However, what we have here is even more annoying. I saw this and I was like, I have to talk about this. Why does this exist? This is our elder black pudding. You thought the black pudding was a bitch? Now we have an elder black pudding. And so it's a huge creature. However, it only has a challenge rating of 4, which is actually the same as the black pudding. So really quickly here, if we want to compare them a little bit, I think that's interesting. That like I said, they have the same CR rating, which doesn't make any sense to me. Because maybe it's just because the elder black pudding is so big, but like they have the same AC, and the elder black pudding has a lot more moves it can do, and they have the same like immunities. So I don't quite understand why this is. It might be a little bit off because for me, I've always found that black puddings can be hard to deal with, even for like a level 4 party. Like if you just throw 2 black puddings at a level 4 party, then it's like they could be dead very, very, very quickly. So going back here, I do think that I would not give this to a level 4 party, and it's right here. I was like, where did it go? I missed it. Anyway. Yeah, but let's go over this stat block here. And remember, it's a very big, it's huge. Most parties, when they're like at levels between like 1 and 5, they're probably only fighting large and below sized creatures. This is a huge sized creature. It's it's a honky boy. So our AC is only 7. It's not hard to hit. We do have 130 hit points though. A speed of 20 foot, and then a climb speed of 20 feet. Strength is 16, dex is 5, con 16, intelligence 1, wisdom 6, and charisma 1. See, like, that makes sense to me. Like, that makes way more sense than the whatever. Anyway. So for our damage immunities, we have acid, cold, lightning, and slashing. And then for our condition immunities, we have blinded, charmed, deafen, exhaustion, frightened, prone. And then senses, blind sight for 60 feet. And then a passive perception of 8. So we do have our amorphous, and then we also have corrosive form. So this is what I think a lot of parties really struggle with, especially when you have a lot of melee attackers that aren't able to just hit this thing from far away. So a creature that touches the pudding or hits it with a melee attack while within 5 feet of it, takes 4 acid damage or 1d8. Any non-magical weapon made of metal or wood that hits the pudding corrodes. After dealing damage, the weapon takes a permanent cumulative -1 penalty to damage rolls. If its penalty drops to -5, the weapon is destroyed. Non-magical ammunition made of metal or wood that hits the pudding is destroyed after dealing damage. The pudding can eat through 2-inch thick non-magical wood or metal in 1 round. So this ability is really mean, and it sucks, especially if, like I said, your players are level 4. They might not have a lot of magic weapons yet. Also, the Elder Black Pudding, I don't remember if I said this, but it comes to us from Dead and They. Sorry. Anyway, random thing. So personally, I would either nerf this ability or make it so something like the Mending Cantrip may be able to, like, maybe after combat they can fix those weapons, because that would be really frustrating, to have your weapon completely ruined forever. So maybe if they're able to fix it, like, through magical means, by, like, mending or something like that, maybe that could be a solution, so your party, they're still able to fight this thing, and not feel really frustrated after that all their weapons are completely destroyed. And I don't know. I think it's still really fun, especially just because this guy is so big. But make sure your party is up for the challenge. I've played with people in the past, and they have specifically said that they do not want to fight black puddings or certain types of oozes because they don't think that they're fun. So maybe just make sure you're being creative and figure out a way to make it fun if you do want to use these creatures. Like, maybe make it so that it's a -1 and it's only lasts for like 24 hours, and then like the corrosion goes away. Or like if they kill the black pudding before their weapons get to -5, then the corrosion goes away. You know what I mean? Things like that, because at the end of the day, it is still a fantasy game, and at least my main goal is always to make sure that my players are having a great time. So yeah, we also get Spider Climb, and we do get our pseudopod action as well. But then we also get the infamous, also not fun ability, which a lot of players, the other reason Oozes can be very not fun, is the split. So when a pudding that is medium or larger is subjected to lightning or slashing damage, it splits into 2 new puddings. If it has at least 10 hit points, each new pudding has hit points equal to half of the original puddings. Rounded down, new puddings are 1 size smaller than the original pudding. So if this thing gets hit by lightning or slashing damage, that is an insane amount. Like, I love, this CR is so wrong. No, not level 4. Like, maybe if your party's smart, and like they roll an insight check or something like that, or history, and maybe they're like, oh yeah, I know that. But if they're really, like, if they don't know, or if they're just new to D&D and they don't know, and they just try and hit it with lightning or slashing damage, like, that's gonna get incredibly deadly very fast. So while this creature could be very fun, probably not for a level 4 party. And I also recommend, being careful with it. But I still think it's really cool. And like I said, depending on your playstyle and your party, it could be super fun. So, yeah. Moving on to our next creature. We actually have a monster that initially came out in Volo's Guide to Monsters, but then was reprinted recently in, you guessed it, Mordenkainen presents Monsters of the Multiverse. Ooh. So this is our Slithering Tracker, which is Chaotic Evil, AC of 14, challenge rating 3, hit points of 39, speed 30 foot, climb 30 feet, and it has a swim speed of 30 feet. It's medium and typically chaotic evil, and, like a lot of slimes, also underdark, dwelling kind of nature. So this is really interesting. This is our first ooze here that actually has a higher dexterity than they do strength. So our strength is 16, dex 19, con 15, intelligence 10. So we have our first sentient ooze that we're talking about here. Wisdom is 14 and charisma 11. So our skills are stealth and survival. And funny enough, this is our first ooze as well that actually has damage vulnerabilities and not just resistances and immunities. So we're vulnerable to cold and fire damage, which is actually, I think, something that's really cool and unique. Resistances, we're resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. And then we're immune to blinded, deafen, exhaustion, grappled, paralyzed, and petrified, prone, restrained, unconscious. So this thing can't be unconscious, which is really interesting. That's a interesting one. Senses, blind sight 120 feet, and passive perception is 12. So it understands languages it knew in its previous form, but can't speak. So it's a challenge rating 3. I already said that. But we have a false appearance ability here. So if the slithering tracker is motionless at the start of combat, it has advantage on its initiative roll. Moreover, if a creature hasn't observed the slithering tracker move or act, that creature must succeed a DC 18 intelligence investigation check to discern that the slithering tracker isn't a puddle. That's really interesting. So we've got our liquid form here. The slithering tracker can enter an enemy's space and stop there. It can also move through a space as narrow as 1 inch. So that's basically similar to our amorphous form from before. And we also have spider climb, and we have a slam attack, and then we also have a life leech attack. And the life leech is one large or smaller creature that the slithering tracker can see within 5 feet of it must succeed on a DC 13 dexterity saving throw or be grappled, and then the escape DC is 13. Until this grapple ends, the target is restrained and unable to breathe unless it can breathe water. In addition, the grappled target takes 16 or 3d10 necrotic damage at the start of its turns, and it can only grapple one creature at a time. So, also, while grappling the target, the slithering tracker only takes half damage dealt to it rounded down, and the target takes the other half. That's really dangerous. That's very dangerous. And then for our bonus actions, which we actually have bonus actions here, we have watery stealth. If underwater, the slithering tracker takes the hide action and it makes a dex or stealth check with advantage. Very cool. And we do have a description for this one here, which is very interesting. So, the quest of revenge sometimes leads those terribly aggrieved to undergo a ritual whereby they transform into bodies of semi-liquid sentience, known as slithering trackers. Innocuous and insidious at the same time, a slithering tracker flows into places where a normal creature can't go and brings its own brand of watery death down on its quarry. The ritual for creating a slithering tracker is known to hags, liches, and priests who worship gods of revenge. It can be performed on a willing creature that hungers for revenge. The ritual sucks all moisture from the subject's body, killing it, yet the subject's mind lives on in the puddle that issues forth from the remains, and so too does its insatiable need for retribution. This is really cool. This monster has a lot of flavor here, especially if you have a big baddie that's a hag, a least, or a hag or a lich or some sort of priest or like cultist, and they send like slithering trackers after the party. That could be really cool. There's also other ways to like do with this monster, and I think it's really interesting because it has sentience. And even though it can't speak, maybe if you had like a party member that has some sort of like telepathic nature, can talk telepathically, maybe you can allow it to speak that way. And I think it's interesting that this creature has to do this willingly. It has to be willing to have this ritual performed on it. So like, think of what sort of creature was so desperate for vengeance that they would be willing to turn themselves into an ooze, because there are other sorts of types of undead and other revengeful creatures, right? Or maybe they were tricked into this by like the hag or the lich or whatever is turning it into this thing. Or maybe you have a player character that wants to play a plasmoid, and maybe they want to do it as like this wasn't their choice. So maybe incorporating some like slithering tracker lore into that plasmoid character and be like, yeah, so like they're actually like a slithering tracker plasmoid, and they didn't have a choice, and like maybe they used to be a tiefling or an elf or something like that, and then they had this horrible ritual performed on them. Like that could be really cool. Maybe in that case I would allow them to speak, because like I said, you know, they'd be a player character in that case. But overall, that's so cool. Like there's a lot of flavor there, and I think that's super fun. So moving on to our next monster here, we actually have a tiny little saplock. I just want to talk about this one really quick because I think it's super cute. And kind of original. So we have the Inkling mascot, which is a challenge rating of 1/4 and comes to us from Strixhaven, a curriculum of chaos. And it is our first tiny ooze. So it's typically neutral, so it can be whatever you want it to be. So there's not too much to say overall. Like it's not a hard little guy to fight against, but the main reason I wanted to talk about this one is because I think this would be super fun to turn into a familiar. Like, either if it's for the warlock or maybe just flavoring one of the wizard familiars, I think this guy is super fun and there's a lot of cool things you can do. Or maybe just have him like as a pet for the party. I think that's, kind of what he was designed to do. But he does get some cool, like, little bit of abilities too. He does have an intelligence of 6 as well, so he is a sentient creature. Skills are stealth, damage, immunities are psychic, condition immunities, blinded, charmed, deafened, exhausted, prone, senses blind sight, and then passive perception is 8. So it understands the languages of its creator, but it can't speak. And it does have the amorphous trait, and then it's got a blot attack, which is, I think, a really funny name for an attack. And then it has ink spray. So the Inkling sprays vicious ink at one creature within 15 feet of itself. The target must succeed on a DC 12 con save or be blinded until the end of the Inkling's next turn. So it also has shadow stealth. So in dim light or darkness, it takes the hide action. I don't know. I think it's a really cool little guy. They are supposed to be mascots for the Silver Quill College in Strixhaven, but I think having this as a familiar for anyone and maybe just adjusting the stat block a little bit so it fits a little bit better for a familiar stat block, even though I think it's already pretty close, especially if we're talking about the Warlock Pact of the Chain familiars compared to just a regular familiar. But yeah, it's really cool. He's a cute little guy. And he's a ooze, and I think it's pretty fun. So, are you ready, guys? Are you ready for this one? I don't know if you're ready for this one. The last ooze that we're going to talk about today is the White Maw, which also comes from us, which is the White Maw, which also comes to us from Dead in Thay. It is a CR10 ooze, and it is Gar frickin' Gantuan. That is very big. It is a gargantuan ooze. You guys know how big that is, right? Like that's like we're talking like dragon, like massive dragon territory. Like you can't get any bigger than this size category in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. That is a big slimy wimey boy. So it's only got an AC of 5, but it does have 217 hit points, and it only has a speed of 10 feet, but it's very big. So it's got a strength of 18, a dex of 1, constitution of 20, intelligence of 12. So this guy is sentient. So imagine being a gargantuan sentient ooze, wisdom of 10, and then charisma of 3. So it's resistant to acid, cold, and fire damage. It's immune to poison damage, and then it's also immune to the blinded, charmed, deafened, exhausted, frightened, poisoned, and prone conditions. It's got blind sight of 60 feet, and it can't see beyond the radius, which if you think about it, since it's a gargantuan creature, is like, that's making my head hurt. Passive perception 10, and then it has telepathy for 50 feet, which is really cool. So imagine like you come across like you're a band of adventurers and all of a sudden like from far away you just see this like weird translucent thing and you get closer and you realize it's a massive ooze that's just like eating a whole town and it's sentient. And it's like, I think the worst part for this for me is that it's sentient and it can talk and like understand people and like knows what's going on. So it does have our amorphous form trait. And then it also has corrode metal. So any non-magical weapon made of metal that hits the White Maw corrodes after dealing any damage. It's basically the same thing as the black pudding with the -1 penalty. And then if it goes to -5, the weapon's destroyed. Although I think at this level, it's a little bit better because our White Maw is a CR10 compared to the black pudding where it's a CR4. So most parties are going to have everyone's going to have at least one magical weapon at this point. So I think it's a little bit better. And this is really cool. So it also has a false appearance. So while the white maw remains motionless, it is indistinguishable from whitestone, which is really cool. So like if you have like a party, like maybe if they're looking for like a secret entrance or something like that, and then so they're like, you know, like how they'll put their hands on like things and they're feeling around, like see if something's an illusion, and then all of a sudden their hand goes and it gets sucked in by a white maw that looked like white stone the whole time. I think that's fun. That's so fun. And then all of a sudden they have to deal with this gargantuan ooze that is literally like disguised as an entire mountain. Like that's fun as heck. That's so cool. And then not only that, but it can talk to them. So it also has killer response. So any creature that starts its turn in the white maw space is targeted by a pseudopod attack if the white maw isn't incapacitated. And here's our pseudopod attack. So melee weapon attack. It's a +8 to hit. It's got a 10-foot reach. So it's 22 points of bludgeoning damage plus 9 acid damage. And if the target is wearing non-magical metal armor, the armor is partly corroded and takes the permanent -1 penalty to the AC it offers, and the armor is destroyed if the penalty reduces the AC to 10, of course, because then there's no more bonus to the armor. So that makes sense. But that's crazy. So it can just, like, it takes its action, right, which is the pseudopod attack. But then if any of the creatures just start their turn within the space of the white maw, then it's automatically going to attack them on top of when it's making the pseudopod attack on its turn. That's crazy. That's, ugh. So we have a little bit of a description for this guy. So in the laboratories inside the Doom Vault, the Red Wizard experiment with a process to create sentient oozes. The creature they call the White Maw is one of their early achievements, a gray ooze of enormous size that has intelligence and can communicate, but it's prone to violent outbursts. So the ooze nature, it also doesn't require sleep. But it would be really cool. Like, what if you have a party, like, what if you have a white maw that doesn't want to be violent? Like, what if it's like, you know, tried to be all alone and in the woods and stuff, and the party comes across it, and it's like, you shouldn't be here. I don't need this. I don't need your help. I'll be just fine. But then the party's like, no, what's going on? Like, talk to us. And then the ooze is like, well, I want to live amongst people. Like, I understand them. I think they're interesting, but I have these uncontrollable outbursts and I don't know what to do. So then what if the party actually has to help the white maw, and maybe they have to figure out a way to like control it or amplify the magic in some way so that it doesn't have these violent outbursts. So I think thematically it's really cool. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of story stuff. I really wanted to pick oozes that I think, except for maybe the Elder Black Pudding, I just thought that was cool, that had a lot of thematic components and cool ways you could implement them in the story and weren't just like right there in front of your party, for them to just kill. Because I think when people think of oozes, most of the time that's kind of what they think of, especially with things like the gelatinous cube. But I think these have a little bit more story and cool ways you can incorporate them, which is why I wanted to talk about them. So I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and maybe hit that like button, but definitely subscribe. And I hope you all have an amazing and wonderful day, and it's filled with smiles, and I will catch you next time. Bye!